Support for this episode comes from the University of San Francisco's SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, JSSJ. If you're passionate about justice, equity, and inclusion, and you're looking for a distinctly Jewish lens, USF's graduate-level JSSJ certificate program offers a powerful opportunity to grow your impact and deepen your practice. This summer, dive into disability and Jewish social justice with none other than Julia Watts-Belzer, author, advocate, and past Judaism Unbound guest, exploring how we build truly accessible, inclusive communities rooted in Jewish values. Applications are open now through May 27th. Learn more and apply at usfca.edu/JEDI.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 484, Shavuot 2025. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're thrilled to feature a returning guest, Annie Prusky, who's also one of our most frequent and has been one of our most beloved teachers at the annual extravaganza known as Shavuot Live. Our conversation today is going to be on the subject of the holiday of Shavuot and how we're trying to make it both more prominent and more unbound in Jewish life today. And we'll have more background about Annie Prusky in just a second, but as a bit of a reminder, Shavuot Live is the biggest event of Judaism Unbound's calendar year. It's a 24-hour extravaganza of Jewish learning and unlearning where we connect with people from all over the world and dive into Torah in all its forms. It's an incredible chance to be in a Zoom room with people from everywhere in the world experiencing revelation together, if that's how you look at things, or just learning Torah and chatting together, if you want to look at it that way. As this episode is released, Shavuot Live is in only 8 days. And if you're listening a few days after this episode drops, we're less than a week from this momentous occasion. Speakers include Arthur Waskow, Danya Ruttenberg, Kashira Halev-Fife, the Yenta podcast, Brent Spodek, Katsira Lesser, Barbara Tita, and so many more. You can register by heading to judaismunbound.com/Shavuot, that's SHAVUOT, and you won't want to miss it. So you should press pause on this episode right now, head over to judaismunbound.com/Shavuot to register, and then come right back. Okay, are you back? Great. So a few more words about our guest today, Annie Prusky. As I said, she's been one of the consistent presenters at Shavuot Live every year who helps us make it magical. She joins us today partially as a guest, but partially as a kind of additional co-host to explore Shavuot as a holiday with us and to look at Shavuot Live as a particular way of marking it. Annie Prusky is an educator, storyteller, community builder, and rabbinical student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. For the past 5 years, she's also served as a Jewish educator, including as Springboard Jewish Education Fellow at University of Maryland Hillel, as Senior Development Manager, Data and Research at One Table, and she just began working as Jewish Learning Specialist for MEM Global, the parent organization of Moishe House. Most importantly, she's taught many of the most engaging programs we've ever had through her appearances at Shavuot Live, and before that, collabing with Lex on Shavuot at an IHOP in Providence. She's taught on topics ranging from wrestling to bagels to keeping kosher to the TV show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. So let's start climbing up Mount Sinai together a little bit early. Annie Prusky, welcome back to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you again.
Delighted to be here.
Well, at the risk of sounding a little bit like the beginning of a Trump cabinet meeting where, everybody sits around and praises the great leader, I was wondering if we could just start by maybe having an unusual question, which is for the guest to describe to us what we're doing. When you tell people about Shavuot Live, what do you think it is?
It's the best, the biggest, the largest crowds. I describe Shavuot Live as like a virtual house party for Jewish nerds and those who love them.
Are there people who don't love Jewish nerds? Because I am nervous about that reality.
Yeah, and some of them might be at that Trump cabinet meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's virtual first and foremost, right? I think we have a lot of, one of the silver linings of a post-COVID world is that we do have more virtual things going on. And so many of them are virtual secondary, right? Like if you're in the room where it happens, that's really the most important. And then we'll put a live stream on for people who want to, zoom in, that sort of thing. And Shavuot Live is really virtual by design, which means that no matter where you are in the world, you're an equal participant with everyone else. I say house because it's Hamish, it's cozy, it feels like, I'm hopping on a Zoom with friends, even when I don't know anybody there. I'm like, well, but these are my people. And it feels like a party. The same way that at a house party, you might have bops going on and people like getting down on the dance floor. And then you have people who like went out for a smoke break on the porch and they're having some deep philosophical conversation. Like it's that house party.
We have had people smoke during Shavuot Live.
But you know what I mean? It's got all of those vibes. It's got the dance party vibes. It's got the deep philosophical conversations vibes. And it's really nerdy.
Well, when I think about, when I teach at Shavuot Live, like it'd be interesting to put my session up next to your session. They're kind of different. Like I think that I have an approach that's let's dive into an ancient Jewish text, but let's read it in surprising ways. And I feel like your sessions are more like about bagels and wrestling and things of that nature. And I don't say that to put them down.
We assumed the opposite.
Yeah, the opposite. Yeah, to put mine down. No, but I think that there's actually something deep that I want to get at, because I think a lot of times when you imagine sessions in a Jewish space about bagels, about wrestling, you don't imagine that as a session that's for nerds. You imagine that that's a session that's meant to kind of throw a bone to the people who don't really like the serious stuff, and it's just for fun, and it's just, quote, cultural. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, that people say it's not really like the serious stuff that a Shavuot study session is about. But I have to say that, all of the ones that you've done don't feel that way at all. Like they feel like on the one hand, it's lighthearted and fun, but on the other hand, like something really deep is happening. And I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a break the fourth wall sense of what you're trying to do when you set up those sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of you have really been my teachers in this, in, taking the phrase bagels and lox Judaism from a derogatory to like that's exactly what we want, because actually you can go deep with anything if you treat it as something worth going deep with. I don't know anything about basketball, and I've had the deepest conversations with Lex about basketball because he cares, because it's thoughtful, because when you care about something, you can go deep on it. And when you care about multiple things in tandem, right? I care about professional wrestling and I really care about Judaism and I care about the way that we tell stories, then you'll find that connection and you'll find that depth. So for me, often I pick a topic that's going to sound funny at first, but my goal is to assert that anything can be deep if you give it the opportunity for depth. And the participants that are attracted to Shavuot Live are folks who are willing to go deep, even on something that doesn't seem deep on its surface, because it's a group of nerds, and nerds can make anything deep.
I really appreciate the way you just put that, because I think it's so central to everything we do, but it's especially central to Shavuot. I mean, the origin story of Shavuot Live in certain senses, although we could tell it different ways, it's that you and I, a couple years, 1 or 2 years prior, decided that we were going to spend Shavuot at an IHOP, International House of Pancakes, for those in the maybe international listeners that don't know what IHOP is, which is funny because it's called international.
How could they, if they're international listeners, how could they not know what the International House of Pancakes is? Yeah,
you'd think, but I think they're mostly in the US. But like, I bring that up because it's actually an embodiment of what you're talking about. And it's like, to me, actually of almost theological importance. To me, if we can't channel Jewish meaning and depth through like absolutely every topic, then like what are we doing? Like there, and maybe it's the pantheist in me that sees divinity and sacredness in all things. Like I actually think that if we are only living in the pages of the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, in the Talmud, in those kinds of spots, by definition we're going to fall short. Not because those texts aren't awesome. I mean, we also have a lot of the book of Exodus and, Genesis and the Talmud. Like those make plenty of appearances at Shavuot Live. But to me, the magic is specifically that we have an hour where we're in the book of Exodus and then an hour where we're talking about wrestling. And it's like we ended up having this incredible conversation about kayfabe. this like borderline between that which is myth and that which is real. And like sort of when you're watching wrestling, there's this storyline and there's this like way in which the characters, the wrestlers are on the precipice between reality and fiction. There's a lot to talk about there Jewishly. And there's going to be something Jewish and interesting when we talk about wrestling that there's not going to be when we look at the Mishnah or when we look at a book from the prophets. Love the Torah, love the Talmud. It's not every side. It's a bunch of sides. But we need the wrestling side, and we need, we're talking sports, like you mentioned basketball, but we also need the musical theater side. Liz Goldstein has done presentations about that. And we need the everything. And it's kind of delightful to spend even 4 or 5 hours and look back and be like, I just was schmoozing about prophetic Judaism and activism and how we channel our Jewish muscles towards justice. And then I was talking about bagels and vigorously debating the best way to prepare a sesame bagel and what to put on it. And then I was in the Talmud. To me, that's what Judaism should be.
Yeah, there's this famous story, it's definitely in the Talmud, might also be in the Mishnah, that, the student is following their rabbi around, through every single part of their daily life, including hiding under their bed while he has sex with his wife. And upon being discovered, he says, well, this too is Torah, right? And I like to walk through life thinking this too is Torah.
So I'm making a small correction, not because I want to contradict what you just said, but because I really want to underscore it. I love this text a lot. It says, this is Torah. There is no two.
This is Torah and I must learn.
We usually teach it as this too is Torah, which I actually think we're trying to say that, when you hide under the bed, like the sex, that's also Torah, but it's a diminishing move to say the two. It's like, it's just, this is Torah. It's actually an equalizing statement where this is equal to everything else that we think of as Torah. Not also Torah, it's supplementary Torah.
Yes, I love that. This is Torah. There's a way of looking at the things that the world has to teach us, the beautiful, powerful, complicated things in the world, and calling them Torah. And that's one lens, right? That's the lens where, we have a magnifying glass and what we're looking at is Judaism. The other way to look at it is to say everything is kayfabe, or everything is bagels, or everything is March Madness, and I want to learn it. The constant interaction between, we have a magnifying glass, we're looking at a beautiful flower with it, right? That flower might be Jewish, or the magnifying glass might be Jewish, or both, but either way, it's a Jewish project.
B'nai Lappi has been really interested for a variety of reasons in the connection between craftsmanship and Jewish study and the Talmud. And there's a particular passage in the Talmud that she talks about where there's 2 rabbis and they're kind of debating over which one of them is going to make sure that the Torah is not lost to Israel. And one of them says, like, if the Torah were ever lost to Israel, I would remember it. I would be able to reconstruct it with my brilliance. And the other rabbi says, because of what I do, the Torah will never be lost to Israel because I plant flax seeds and then grow the flax and cut the flax and weave the flax into nets. And then with the nets, I catch deer and then I use the deer's skins to make Torah scrolls. And then I teach the Torah to kids. And there's a whole thing. And B'nai has this idea that maybe there's some connection between craftsmanship and Torah. And so we're part of this small group of people like us that meets periodically. And we had a retreat a few months ago and had this idea that we should explore different crafts. And maybe by exploring different crafts, we'll have a sense of what B'nai was kind of after. And one of the things that we did was we went to this soap making workshop. What we learned in the soap making was that in order to make soap, and sorry for soap makers if I get the technology here a little bit wrong, but the idea is that you take lye, which is this harsh, dangerous chemical, and combine it with oil. And then you kind of let it sit for a while. If you pour the oil into the lye and you touch it, it will burn you. It will be, but if you let it sit for a few weeks, there's this process called saponification, and somehow it turns into soap. And then you're able to use this as soap after a few weeks. And there was just something that struck me, and that struck me a lot in conversations recently, that there's something about putting any 2 ingredients together and seeing what comes of it. But even more powerfully, if one of the ingredients is dangerous on its own, right? And scary. that somehow that, when put into conversation with something else, which may or may not be dangerous on its own, in the case of oil, it's not, can actually create something much more useful than either of those things, or something along those lines. And as it strikes me that that's part of what Judaism Unbound is all about, but maybe part of what Shavuot Live is about, and maybe what we could do even more on Shavuot Live if we were thinking about it. Like, what would it look like for each hour to be sort of bringing a dangerous idea into conversation with Judaism?
What I'll break the fourth wall with is every year there's a couple moments that arise. I never know when they're going to be, but at some point in the flow of the 24 hours, somebody in the chat, we get hundreds of pages of chat, like size 10-point font chat from this 24-hour event. It's my favorite part is afterwards going through and seeing tens of thousands of words of beautiful Torah people provided in the chat. But like somebody will say at, 6 a.m. after we've been up a bunch of hours, like, oh gosh, I'm so grateful that Judaism Unbound thought to put Annie's kayfabe presentation right before the presentation from somebody about Midrash. Like, that's such a beautiful connection they made. And like, that was because Annie was down to do a 6 a.m. slot, and whoever the Midrash person is like in England. And so it's noon their time, and it just worked with the time flow. But then they're not wrong, right? Like what you just said, Dan, is part of the design. Like our framework, it's not that there's 24 discrete separable sessions. I think this is part of what maybe separates us from some other Shavuot tikkuns, like all-night tikkuns, is that we keep it all in one room. And we have like a little introduction of each speaker, but it actually kind of flows fully from one to the next. And the chat doesn't have a break. So like all of a sudden you go from talking about wrestling to talking about Midrash, and somebody replies to an earlier chat and the two sessions are in conversation with each other. That comes from a place of what you just said. No matter what the two topics are, what the two variables are, by placing those in conversation. Ideally, they've never been in conversation before. Like they're two wildly different topics that have never been placed in conversation before Jewishly. And so we can do that and generate something powerful and that will transform some amount of people in the room meaningfully. And like that has been my experience as a participant, not just as somebody like teaching, that I will hear somebody's amazing remarks on Walter Benjamin, incredible philosopher, thinker. And then I'll be listening to somebody talk about a book from the Apocrypha. And it's like, oh, were these written at the same time in the same place? Of course not. But like, it feels like eerie. Like they were meant for this moment to be placed in conversation with each other. And there's a moment like that every year because we kind of throw these topics at the wall. I don't want to over imply the randomness. Like we're thoughtful about how Shavuot Live goes. But again, it's not just like a happenstance. It's a principle of how we operate that we try to have that happen because we believe that there's Torah in every speaker that's offering things, but also in what is generated when it's placed next to something else. It's almost like we're in an art class and it's like a challenge to the room. Like, you have to find two random things and create a still life or something.
There's a magic element of the flow between sessions, both of the lovely ritual moment between sessions where we transition from one to the other, but also the flow of, a 4 or 5 or 6 hour session. I have never made it to all 24 plus hours of Shavuot Live, but I have been lucky enough to participate both as a participant, as a presenter, and then back to being a participant. And there is something really magical about the way the topics get put together. I used to organize my bookshelf in rainbow cover order, which put all sorts of weird books next to each other that certainly did not belong next to each other, including Girl Sex 101 and Jewish Liturgy, A Comprehensive History, which are the same color. And so they were right next to each other. To me, I loved that way of organizing my library because it felt like a poetry exercise. Just reading the titles in order felt like a poetry exercise and felt like commentary on my own life, on the kinds of wisdom that I gained from multiple sources. And to some extent, Shavuot Live feels like a miniature version of a library like that. Like, here's 24 awesome titles, and we're going to put them together and see what magic happens.
Last Shavuot, I remember this very distinctly. My wife and I were sitting around at a table with our friends, and my wife, as basically a joke, said, "Who here believes that their soul was present at Mount Sinai?" And only I raised my hand. And she looked at me like I was crazy, like she knows that I'm not a believer in that way.
Dan the Mystic.
Yeah, so she's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, in my mind, Sinai is a myth. And what a myth is a story through which we tell a truth that is always true. And we tell it as though it were a story that happened in history, but we don't think of it. It's not really a story that happened in history. It's a way of describing what's happening all the time. And if you ask me, what does that myth stand for? It stands for the idea that we sort of receive revelation, by which I mean that we have ideas that we can't quite say where they came from, right? That's not to deny the biology of it, it came from my brain, but there's some way in which you feel that you're discovering something, that you're gaining greater understanding or whatever it may be. And I said, I'm feeling that right now. So if I'm feeling that right now, the myth that we use to tell about that experience, which is the story of Sinai, then I'm there. I'm there right now. So I was there then because there is no time. Time is compressed in a myth. But I think that a lot of people don't feel that, and a lot of people, it takes them a long time. I mean, right, it took me over 50 years to have that kind of capacity to think that way. And part of me wonders whether there are ways for people to get there in other ways. And one way is like to take substances. But I'm wondering if another way might be, like, in a way, I'm putting a call out. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do it, and I shouldn't put a call out for things that I myself am not going to do. But I'd almost recommend that people out there try to stay awake as long as they possibly can, like through the night at Shavuot Live, and see what happens. See if somehow experiencing these hours, like you're saying, Lex, that are maybe by design, maybe by accident, that they're coming one after the other. But I think when your brain starts to get foggy, when you start to, your rational thought part of your brain kind of turns off, you start to see these connections between things, like talking about how, like B'nai is seeing between craftsmanship and Torah, right? And you start to see these things. And I'm curious what would happen if there was like a collective experience of that, right? If there were 20, 30 people in the room that had all been up for 20 hours, and start to see things that they wouldn't have seen on their own. I wonder if we could somehow, engineer that at some point.
Well, I think we do have that a little. It's not the 24 hours, but usually around 6 or 7 a.m. East Coast U.S. time, we're at that zone, and there are a number of people who have been there for like 10 hours, and their body is up at a time where they're certainly not normally up. And if they are up at that time, they're not usually engaging intellectually at 4 or 5 a.m. And the chat does often erupt in like, oh my gosh, like, anybody else feeling strange right now? The emojis get a little wackier. Like there's certainly something that happens there.
By the way, that's my favorite time to teach.
Yeah, and we've often had you doing one of these like super participatory interactive debates about bagels, or what was it, like whether mixing a spoon with other metal is boiling a kid in its mother's milk.
Yeah, chickpea and hummus is a calf in its mother's milk.
Yeah. Or the wrestling stuff, like all of that. But like, I do want to take a step back for a second and sort of ask the two of you, this event we're doing, 24 hours of learning in a Zoom room for Shavuot. On some level, I think people who know things about Shavuot would be like, I kind of get where you were coming from in terms of doing that event. There's this tradition, staying up all night learning Torah, that you're extending to be 24 hours. Got it. But like, nothing told us to make it 24 hours. It just felt to us like, I don't know if 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. is enough. Like, I don't know if 10 hours really does it. And I haven't really thought about that ritual choice of like why we did that. I think there's something more happening. And I kind of want to ask it in the context of how Shavuot has evolved and changed over time generally. And so my question, and maybe Dan, if you want to start, but like, we've talked in the past about how Shavuot in different eras of history has really been like a totally different holiday, and then it's been new versions entirely of what this day could be, and not just slight tweaks. So I'm curious, like, how would you articulate the ways in which Shavuot Live is sort of building on previous iterations of Shavuot experience?
for me, the one place that I want to anchor it for myself is the idea that one of the ways that Jewish holidays have changed significantly over the course of time, they've only changed in these big ways, a few times. And something big changes. It's not just like a small change to the practice of the holiday. It's like it's reflecting something major, right? The temple was destroyed or some major dislocation happened. And for me, what's interesting is the move from seeing the story of Sinai as a story that maybe a lot of Jews saw as historical. I think a lot saw it as a myth, or a lot of the rabbis understood that it was a myth, but nevertheless told it as a story that kind of happened to somebody else, Moses. And to me, the exciting possibility of a new version of Shavuot would be one where we don't sort of celebrate and remember a previous time when we received the Torah, past tense, but actually to bring that myth more into the realm of this is what the holiday is about, and saying that we are in the position of Moses. In other words, we are receiving the revelation, not memorializing when he received the revelation. And what would the holiday look like if it was designed that way? That's sort of one of the pieces for me that's involved in the reconceptualizing it. And, part of me was thinking like 24 hours is not long enough. And I think actually the first or second time we did it, it was even longer, right? And there was something in me that liked the longer, the more loopy people will be, right? The more somehow that experience could be had.
If we are putting ourselves in the position of Moses, then I think we need a Shavuot live that lasts 40 days and 40 nights, or at least 40 hours, right?
Yeah, I like that.
24 hours is nothing compared to Moses staying up all night and all day and all night again. The other thing that it makes me think of is that 24 hours is a very not Jewish time measurement, right? Like, we have all sorts of ways of measuring Jewish time. We use the moon, we use the sun, but 24 hours is an artificial construction that is not a part of Jewish tradition. But it is a time measurement that defines my daily life. And so by making the Shavuot Live experience 24 hours, it's taking the Torah of this time unit and combining it with the Torah of another defining time unit, which is the dusk to dawn cycle, which defines Jewish time in large part, right? Dusk to dusk. More often than dawn to dawn, but dusk to dawn and dawn to dusk as well. And so to me, that feels like it's offering something, combining civilizations, to speak like a Reconstructionist, right? Combining the civilization that uses 24 hours and combining the civilization that uses dusk to dawn as the time measurement.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it gets to some of the choices we've made even graphically when we're creating like visuals for Shavuot Live. We tend to have like a mountain. We've actually used an inverted mountain, which is shouting out a particular narrative in the Talmud that Dan often likes to teach about. I won't say too much about it because I'm betting it will come up at this Shavuot Live, so you can come learn about it. And so that feels kind of stately and grounded and naturey. And then we have it combined with like a mug of coffee in clip art and like a computer screen, which again, it's that juxtaposition of old and new, of like classic Torah, not so classic Torah. I wanted to think about the dislocation piece, Dan, that you mentioned. And
well, the best piece of that graphic, I think, is to shout out when we were talking about something that's dangerous and something that's not dangerous, right? Dan, you said, oh, well, maybe the not dangerous thing is the Judaism, and we're bringing in something dangerous from outside of Judaism to combine. But in that image, I think the mug of coffee and the computer screen feels very safe, and the inverted mountain feels very dangerous in that space. So maybe that brings in also the teachings that the things that we think of as safe might in fact be very dangerous. I think Apocrypha is a great example of that, right? And the things that we think of as dangerous might in fact be really safe and really rich.
Ooh, I love that a lot. Although I do think plenty of people have seen both coffee and computers as varying kinds of dangerous.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Which is why we have like I'm thinking of like Mormons who have prohibited coffee, and also like Jews who look at our work early on and even now and say like, oh, you're doing all this digital Jewish stuff. That's a threat to offline Judaism, blah, blah, blah.
I was thinking you were saying something else, like there's nothing more dangerous to a computer than a cup of coffee.
Oh, so the juxtaposition of the coffee with the computer. See, this is why we talk what we talk. The dislocation thing, Dan, that you brought up, I think it's really profound. And I also want to name again, not to be too hubristic, but like in the story of Shavuot that involves bringing Shavuot Live to be a thing and welcoming people from around the world for 24 hours, that started with a dislocation too. So it is true that the origin story involved me and Annie at an IHOP thinking, how could we learn in an unexpected place? How could we learn unexpected topics in an unexpected place like IHOP?
With a lot of dairy.
Yes, with a lot of dairy, which is why IHOP was perfect and it had 24-hour Wi-Fi. But the other piece is COVID happened in March of 2020. And so Annie and I had been thinking that there would be some new iterations of this IHOP thing, but I hadn't really been thinking about doing something online yet. And then it became that's, if we were going to have a Shavuot gathering with hundreds of people, it was going to be online that year. Another dislocation, not so dissimilar from the temple being destroyed. Honestly, like this dislocation affected a bigger percentage, all of the world's Jewish population than the temple destruction did. Like there were Jews who did not live anywhere near the temple that were less affected. And so this event came to be through that moment. And then we realized it's really worth doing even when we're not in that same moment. And so we kept it going. But like, it's gotten me to think about like, what even is Shavuot and how are we continuing it through this? Like, you know, people talk about the cloud, internet as the cloud. Part of it is that the internet, it feels sort of above understanding and up above us in certain ways. But the cloud, like, it's high in the air. And when you're flying in a plane in the clouds, when you look down, you can see a lot more people than when you're on the ground.
Well, if you're in the cloud, you can't really see the people.
Yeah, that's true. You can't see the specific people from the plane, but you know they're there, and you can see the cars, and like when you're a certain height.
No, but if you're in the cloud.
Oh, I see. Because
like if you're in the cloud, you just see white.
Yes, this is true. But like the magic that you're describing, Annie, like we're, in my view, really doing what Shavuot actually in its origins was meant to be. Like you would go on this pilgrimage, and you would gather with like the maximal amount of Jews, or at the time Israelites, that would be gathering at any given time. It was one of 3 pilgrimage festivals, Shavuot, Sukkot, and Passover. That was the 3 moments of the year where you'd sort of be with the most people. I think we've lost the sense that part of what our holidays is for is like a coming together moment of the world's Jewish people, because we do it in like our micro communities all around the world, and there's less of like a unifying force across all those communities. But when you're in the internet, you actually have that. Like you have this pilgrimage where people from all around the world are in one place. That's what a pilgrimage is. Like, yes, we didn't saddle our donkeys and wander a bunch of miles to get to it. We like put on our slippers and walked to our computers. But like, that's a pilgrimage. We're inhabiting this place that people call the cloud on a holiday that is about a guy being up really high on a mountain, not seen by the people, being hovered over by a cloud. Like that's what the 10 Commandments is described as being. And like here we're doing it. So like that's cool to me I don't think we're just like coming up with a random new thing. I think there's like a logic to why it's Shavuot and not some other moment in the year.
Absolutely. If we think of the olden days experience of pilgrimage as a kind of recreating or reverse engineering of a Sinai experience, right? Collective effervescence is real. The energy that you get from being in a huge crowd, the magic and the beauty and the contact high almost of being around that many people, particularly when you're diverse in experience but united in goal, right? And united in motivation, is an extremely powerful experience. And it makes me wonder whether the pilgrims, you know, back in the day making pilgrimage to the temple, were trying to recreate that kind of psychological experience of being at Sinai, whether or not it's real, right? What I've been joking about, you know, through Passover and through the Omer has been Jews remember so hard that sometimes we remember things that didn't happen. And so that's how I think about Sinai. Like, we remember so hard that we remember this thing that didn't even happen, and it feels like collective memory, right? And so
that's the best ever. We're going to quote you on that a lot.
Oh, please do. It's the best. And I feel like Shavuot Live is doing that same thing, accomplishing that same goal of reverse engineering a Sinai experience. And whether that's the loopiness from sleep deprivation, or whether that's the collective effervescence of being in a crowd, being in a group. And I don't often feel that high from being in a virtual crowd, but I do at Shavuot Live because of the interaction, because of the energy, because of the thousands of pages of Torah that gets produced in the chat. It really feels like I'm in a crowd, participating in a crowd experience. That feels like a big part of the magic for me.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that, because I imagine that if I were a Israelite living at the time of the temple and came to the Shavuot pilgrimage, I would feel uncomfortable there. Like, I don't love huge crowds, right? Like, I would feel like I might run into someone that I don't want to run into here. And so I would probably try to like hide in the side of the courtyard or whatever. And it's interesting because it occurs to me, like, when we talk to people about something like Shavuot Live and we're like, oh yeah, it's 24 hours on Zoom, they're like, oh my God, I couldn't be on Zoom for 24 hours. Like, I can barely even go to one Zoom meeting. Whereas for me, I spend my whole day in Zoom meetings. I don't feel lonely. I am with people all the time, but yeah, we're not physically together. I also enjoy being physically together with people at different opportunities, but there's something about different kinds of experiences for different kinds of people. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I feel like I've discovered on Shavuot Live is that for certain people, the idea of spending many hours together online in a Zoom room actually feels like a pilgrimage in a way that I think a lot of other people are like, how could you possibly compare the two? And yet those people who love the pilgrimage on Zoom would probably hate the pilgrimage in person, or at least a lot of us would. And so, I don't know, there's just like something about different strokes for different folks. I mean, would be the most uninspired way to say it. But there is something that strikes me about maybe another dislocation, that it enables different Jews to have different kinds of Judaism, and for that to be okay. Mm-hmm. And that tends to be in conflict with what some people think of as this unity of the Jewish people, by which they often mean, whether consciously or not, we should all be doing the same thing. And if we're not all doing the same thing, it's okay, but it's this concept that the Talmud has of b'diavad, like it's not the best.
And in some way that's a departure from what Judaism has been, when in fact Judaism has always been incredibly diverse and varied. And I think that's in large part why Judaism has survived. One of the things that we've been studying in rabbinical school this semester is doing a lot of translations of Psalms. And many Psalms start with Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents, or a song of climbers. And most of the time we are operating under the assumption that if it's a song of ascents, it's a song that you sing while you're on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, right? And we've had a lot of fun experimenting with what other kinds of ascents are there? What other kinds of grueling journeys are there? What other kinds of climbing are there? And so I wonder whether each session of Shavuot Live is, what would the singular be? Ma'alah, a height that we're climbing, right? And together we're collectively climbing these ma'alot. And Lex, earlier you mentioned that it's sort of a tag team thing, right? To bring it back to the wrestlers, right. Where you can tag in and out, but we're all on this journey together, right? And different people might be running different lengths of the journey, but we're all climbing these ma'alot together. We're all climbing these heights together.
Song of Ascent is a hilarious phrase to say auditorily that is not written, because people can hear it as Song of Ascent. Like, that's the blessing and curse of my pun brain that like just hears words like that constantly. And you mentioned that both of you mentioned that there are diverse experiences of Jews, and different Jews might resonate with certain pilgrimages and not others. There's always been this diversity, Annie, you were talking about. Like, within any Zoom event that is being done well, like, something we don't talk about is that Zoom is actually a hyper flexible environment to be in as a participant. And what I mean by that is, if I go to something offline in a room, I can't be invisible to that. Like, I can leave the room, but like if I'm in the room, I'm visible. Mm-hmm. I can't be in the room and simultaneously not visible. These are all ridiculous statements to say, but I'm saying them a bunch of times because, like, in Zoom, you can be in the room and hyper engaged, thoroughly paying attention, but not seen by anyone. That matters, actually. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who don't go to things because they would like to pay attention, but like not really have to deal with interfacing, and I'm using interface, with interfacing with a bunch of people in the same way. And Zoom offers that capability. Now, it's also a downside that like, it's nice to be in a room where there's 50 people and all 50 of those people are visible, as opposed to being in a room with 50 people and 20 of them are visible and the other 30 have opted out of that. So you have less of that feeling of what you described earlier as collective effervescence, Annie. But the give and take is that people have this customizability even when they're in the same event. So like, there are people in our event who engage super deeply the whole time and are not seen or heard by anyone because they're in the chat. There are like chat rebbies and gabbies or whatever term you want to, like they are all over the chat and they don't want to be visible because they're lying down and they're like looking upward at the camera. They don't want to have to be worried about what it looks like. They might take a nap for 20 minutes and then wake up again and be back in the chat. We really have those people. Like, that's one person. Then there's people who are able to be seen on screen the whole time. They put their video on. They never participate in the chat. The chat feels distracting to them. They don't want to do the chat. They want to be in the programming that's in the center of the room and not on the margins of the room, in the Mishnah, not the Gemara, in the central piece, not the commentary. And that's great too. All of these are ways you can participate. And that is a plus. That is a real feature of digital video chat engagement that like, you can't be in a room offline and never open your physical mouth, but communicate to that whole room effectively, unless you speak ASL, unless you
or another sign language,
or any, not just American Sign Language, another. But like, that is something that you open up the possibilities and the flexibilities of how people can connect. It's why we should be doing Jewish things online just as much now as we were a few years ago. Because there are people who need that. There are people who might not need it, but want it. And people kept on saying to us, like, Shavuot, like, I know you've had hundreds upon hundreds of participants the first couple years of COVID. You've got people, like thousands who watch the recordings afterwards. If you add them to the mix, it's going to get smaller. Like people aren't going to keep going, and you might want to think about shortening it because I don't think people have that in them anymore. And we just haven't had that experience. Like people, so we have seen overall number of people in the room at any point go down, but the people who are coming are staying for substantially longer. So our average person our first year stayed in the room for about 90 minutes. And our average person last year was in the room, I think, for 4 hours and 59 minutes. So that's showing that digital engagement is actually still intriguing and exciting to people, to the point that they'll stay in a long time.
I think in large part because of its versatility. And I'll add, just to add maybe two more examples to the beautiful ways that virtual programming allows people to interact, is that if I'm doing a session at 4 a.m. and like even I'm a little bit loopy and I just got up 2 hours ago, right? What a gift to see folks who are sitting at their kitchen table having breakfast because it's bright outside, or having dinner and I'm watching a sunset while I'm watching, they're watching a sunset while I'm watching a sunrise. Or folks who leave their camera on in the same room and they might come in and out and I'm getting a little bit of a scene into their lives. I see their cat come across the screen, right? Or they take the room on a walk. And I've seen those things happen in the backgrounds of folks' videos too. And that also feels really special and not like an experience you would ever get, sitting in a conference room.
Annie, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how you are currently in rabbinical school. And I'm sort of wondering, like, what kind of rabbi are you going to be? Like what kind of rabbi does Shavuot Live and talks about wrestling? What does that mean? Like, what is the future of rabbis that compels you?
When I think about the kind of rabbi that I want to be, the kind of rabbi that I'm becoming, I think about being able to take things seriously without being serious. And I see that all the time with Judaism Unbound. I see that all the time with Shavuot Live. And it's a gift that I've really incorporated into my life, that you can be serious about something, right? Or take something seriously in the sense of taking it deeply, giving it attention, giving it weight, waiting to see what truths emerge from it and believing that there is truth in there without treating it as sacred or putting it on a pedestal. Or I'm even going to backpedal because I say treating it sacred as though treating something sacred means we don't touch it. Yeah. But in fact, engaging with something is often how we express that something is sacred to us, because we are engaging with it, because we're messing with it, because we can't help but want to take it off the pedestal and give it a hug or take it for a walk, right? And so even as I'm speaking right now, I'm feeling that push and pull between the way that we are taught to think of sacredness as separateness. And actually, I want to think of sacredness as integration. I want to think of sacredness as bringing things together, as bringing joy and light into things, as allowing things to have as much depth as they possibly can, believing that there really is depth in so many more topics than we often think there is. There is Torah in so many more TV shows than we think there is. That there is a world that is full of Torah, a world that is full of depth, if only we treat it that way.
I just want to, I loved what you were saying about playing with it. It seems to me that there are a lot of things that we love in our lives. And when we think about the things that we love other than Judaism in our lives, I feel like most of them are things that we can kind of take off the shelf and experience for ourselves. You can go to a rock concert, and we should do that periodically to hear the music directly from the singer. But most of the time we interact with it by, well, in my day it was listening to, records, but now it's,
clicking play on Spotify. Yes.
And it just feels like for most people, somehow, and maybe Passover is a kind of exception, but for most people, I think that their experience of Judaism is that it's not something that they can do on their own. It's something that can only be done in essentially the rock concert venue. I'm wondering, in a sense, what kind of rabbis do we need? And feels to me like you are likely to become that kind. So if you could kind of articulate it, then maybe some of our listeners would say, I could be that kind of rabbi. And what does it look like to be a rabbi? What do we need for rabbis to do that enables people to have that kind of relationship with Judaism rather than a relationship that's kind of more at a distance or that has to be mediated? And actually, as I'm articulating the question, it's occurring to me that there is a lot in the history of religion, also in the history of Judaism, where there has been a push and pull about this question of whether the people can have the primary experience, whether we're talking about revelation or other primary experiences, like where you feel the Holy Spirit within you, right? Versus where that has to be mediated by whether it's an authority or some other kind of figure that says that primary experience, it's too much for the people, or it's not right for the people. We have to have people standing in the middle to channel it. And I don't put that down necessarily. There might be really good arguments in favor of that. I guess I'm asking for those of us in the room right now, I think, who don't really think that way, what would that mean in terms of an evolving role for rabbis, for the folks who until recently had often been in that mediating sort of position?
My favorite metaphor for describing the kind of rabbi that I want to be, at least these days, and hopefully it'll change, is a librarian, in the sense that because I have trained in this thing, I have access to a lot of information, and I also know where to find information, so that when people come into the library, they can ask me, hey, I'm looking for either a specific book, great, I'll help you find it, or more commonly, I'm looking for information about intermarriage. I'm looking for information about keeping kosher. I'm looking for information about professional wrestling. And to be able to point them, all of which are equally valid ways of engaging with Judaism, I would say that's the three genders of Judaism are intermarriage, keeping kosher, and professional wrestling. So that's one role that a librarian does, right? A librarian also knows all this cool stuff that's in the library that people might not think to ask for. And so we'll create these displays and say, hey, check out all these cool resources we have, right? That the librarian knows that when people think of the library, they mostly think of books, but libraries have so many more resources than that, especially really good public libraries, right? Have so many more resources beyond the books. And most importantly, and I think crucially when we're talking about authority figures, is that the library does not belong to the librarians. Certainly they might know their way around the library a little bit better than someone who walks in off the street, but a public library is for the public, and the librarians are there to serve the public. And so that is really the core of what I see myself as doing. I'm the one who's nerdy enough and, willing to devote my 5 or 6 years to training in the Dewey Decimal System. But that doesn't mean that I love books any more than someone who takes out, a million books from the library. that I feel passionate about this library. I feel passionate about the resources. I feel passionate about providing access. And I want to spend the rest of my life wandering around in the basement and seeing what other fun stuff is there and bringing it back up for a display.
Yeah, I love that a lot. I've never heard that image of what a rabbi should be, and I like it more than all the ones I have. What I love is it's that the library serves the public, and that public is sort of everyone. And ideally, Judaism would also be channeled out and serving everyone, and not even just those who walk into that library. Like, libraries are like, I'm somebody who thinks, and this is, I guess, controversial in our world that cuts all public services, but like, I actually think a library is serving a function for everybody in a community, even the folks who never set foot in that library. Like, it is playing a key role in the health of that community. We also know that libraries today are a key resource for people who are unhoused or who help. Like, there's so many things that libraries do, which, if we're mapping Judaism, like, aspirationally, I would hope that Judaism is able to be that same thing, that people think they're coming for like a set of holidays and teachings, but they're actually gaining a set of ways to interact with the world, and even, to go the housing, like shelter in times of need, and resources that can help people just grapple in the world. Like, that's what Judaism should be, and that's what libraries strive to be.
Libraries can be food pantries, and libraries can be voting places, and libraries can be community organizing spaces, and libraries can be a place where you can hang out without buying something. And I want Judaism to be all of those things too.
Wow. We're nearing the close of this conversation, and I do want Annie to get some final words from you. I do think part of what we stand for organizationally is that you definitely don't need to be a rabbi. And
totally.
What I love about our spaces is I think, and only others can really tell me if we're succeeding at this, but I am striving to achieve, and I think we often achieve, a space where the distinction between those who are empowered as leaders and those who are there as quote unquote attendees, or, I mean, we don't have congregants, but that's the best word to map. That distinction is less in our spaces. Annie, you mentioned that you have come to our events, been an attendee for 1 or 2 hours, then switched roles, been the presenter, then switched roles again and gone back to being an attendee. I do that too. Now, I'm also aware that as the person who convenes the space, I'm never fully I don't want to erase that there are ways in which I am empowered in this space differently. But it is common for our presenters to stick around and then be the students for each other. We're queering the notion of leader and follower to a certain degree, and even having the chat the whole time. Ideologically, we have the chat open in every single Judaism Unbound Zoom room. That's true in our classes in the Onion Yeshiva. That's true in Shavuot Live. It's true in all of the things we've convened, to my knowledge. What we're doing there is we're saying, if you're in this space, you're actually a potential creator at any given time. You are able to bring Torah to the chat. That's a pivotal piece of what it means to have a successful Jewish community, in my view. We have failed. I think we have failed across the board. In synagogue after synagogue, JCC after JCC, Jewish institution after Jewish institution, the people who give Torah are the ones paid by that organization to be staff, and the ones occasionally on the board or charged with leading an event. It's not everybody who walks in. We're trying to change that. And Annie, I guess I'm curious to get back to Shavuot Live. You don't have to just suck up to us. Has your experience been that, or what other features would you sort of take us home
My
with?
experience has absolutely been that. I cannot tell you how meaningful and enriching it has been. When we spent all night in that IHOP, however many years ago, becoming a rabbi wasn't even on my radar. Over the course of the many times that I've taught and led and guested and participated at Shavuot Live, they have all been snapshots in my journey towards realizing, and then eventually realizing that I think I might want to be a Jewish educator professionally, and then, oh my gosh, maybe I want to be a rabbi, and then actually starting rabbinical school. Shavuot Live has been almost this sort of spiral moment for me to come back to the joy of what I love. And I don't feel like I've gotten any more or less kavod rav, however I want to translate that, honoring of the rabbi or honoring of the leader, whether I'm in rabbinical school or not. And I don't want any more than that, because the Shavuot Live experience is giving that kavod, is giving that honor to whoever is leading, no matter what their qualifications are. I love that there are folks who are leading who are rabbis, there are folks who are leading who have PhDs, there are folks who are leading who have both, and there are folks who are leading who have no, initials to put before or after their name to prove that they're an authority, but they have what to teach anyway. And the community gives them that space and that platform to teach and learns from them. I feel incredibly lucky to have learned from, the fancy pansies at Shavuot Live. And, there are fancy pansies every year, and that's fun. And the fact that the fancy pansies are given the same level of kavod, the same space, the same platform, the same honor as everybody else who's teaching is such a gift, because I think it exactly enacts what you're speaking about, Lex, that everyone has the potential to be a leader. Everyone has the potential to cultivate a space, to hold a space, to teach Torah. And you don't have to be a rabbi or a PhD or whatever in order to be qualified to do that. You just need the space that's going to be held for you. And Shavuot Live is that space.
Thank you so much, Annie Prusky, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
It's been an honor.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. Of course, the first thing we got to do as we're closing this episode is remind you, where do you go? You just heard this amazing conversation with Annie Prusky. You want to sign up for Shavuot Live. What's the destination? Great question. We're happy to answer. JudaismUnbound.com/Shavuot 2025. That's JudaismUnbound.com/SHAVUOT 2025. That's the place to go. Big register here button. You click that, you put in your name, and then you're ready to roll. That's what you want to do, because on May 31st at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, through June 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, 24 hours, as we discussed, the greatest extravaganza in Jewish learning and Jewish unlearning that happens every year is back. You want to be there. And this is a beautiful situation, because when events are 1 hour long or 2 hours long, often there's conflicts. But when there's 24 hours to work from, you'll be able to be there for some of it. So we hope to see you. Also, we are always grateful when you are in touch with us with any ideas you have, in this case about Shavuot or about Judaism Unbound generally. Any questions you have, comments, visions for the future, all of that good stuff is welcome. You can be in touch in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook and Instagram handles. Both of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, you can go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com, and find show notes for this episode along with all sorts of other goodies. And third, you can email us, Dan@JudaismUnbound.com or Lex@JudaismUnbound.com, and we would love to hear from you. We also definitely want to encourage you. Shavuot Live is free, but it doesn't cost nothing. We have to put a lot of time into it, a lot of staff hours, all sorts of behind-the-scenes things. And so if you are able to make a donation, whether it's $5 or $5,000, we would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And you can do so by heading to JudaismUnbound.com/donate and making either a monthly recurring gift or a one-time donation. So thank you so much for being here and listening. Can't wait to climb up the mountain with you on Shavuot soon. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.